Welcome everyone. I'm Lonnie Friedman. I am the health literacy specialist for Vaughan Public Libraries. I'm located in the Mackenzie Health at Vaughan Library. Before we get started tonight, I first like to do a land acknowledgement. Vaughan Public Libraries respectfully acknowledges that our libraries were built upon the territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation per the Toronto Purchase Agreement, or Treaty 13. We also recognize we are situated in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee, who occupied this land before the arrival of European settlers. The city of Vaughan is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge their contributions to the life and prosperity of this land. As representatives of the people of the city of Vaughan, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. Now, I'd like to introduce our two special guests all the way from PEI tonight. And our first one is Alex Pattakos, Ph.D. He's AKA Dr. Meaning, is one of the founders of the Global Meaning Institute. He is a political scientist, a philosopher, professor, and international best-selling author. And our other special guest tonight is Elaine Dundon, who is a philosopher of meaning. She's an author of 3 international best-selling books on innovation and meaning, as well as one of the founders of the Global Meaning Institute. So welcome both. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Lonnie, for having us.
Thank you, Lonnie, and welcome everyone.
Yes.
So I'm going to start. I'm going to, did you want to say something?
No, Lonnie just gave you the floor.
Okay,
so
thank you, Lonnie. Okay, so I'm going to say a few opening comments.
Oh, by the way, we're married. So if you start to see, kind of pushing back and forth, you'll see that's the reason why.
I usually don't tell people that so that they could, wonder what's going on between us. But anyway, I'm going to share a few opening comments, and then I'm going to pass it over to Alex, who's going to speak about Viktor Frankl in our book, Prisoners of Our Thoughts. And he's going to send it back to me for some closing comments. And then Lonnie will send it over to you for the questions. So just so that people know where we're going in the next hour. So last weekend, we had a wonderful event where we went with Janet and Daryl, just a shout out to them, that we saw a movie called Living, which starred Bill Nye. And it's a story about an older man who's diagnosed with a serious illness and begins to question the choices he's made in his life and what he should do with the time that he has remaining. So I don't want to spoil the movie or the ending of the movie, but the movie did spur the discussion about whether the name of the movie should have been called Living or Existing. So in a broader sense, we should ask ourselves, are we truly living or are we existing? Are we going through the motions, doing our tasks, going to work, paying our bills, doing the same thing every weekend? Are we just existing? Are we finding life to be a bit stressful, maybe even a struggle? Or maybe also feeling that we have a lot of potential within ourselves, but it's bottled up and we're not expressing it. Or on the other side, or another side of looking at it, maybe we're really enjoying life and that we're finding that we're living a meaningful life and we're living a life that really matters and we're making a difference to other people. So we should always keep that question in the back of our minds is, are we living or are we simply just existing? So Alex and I have had the great pleasure to travel to many countries, and whether it's different cultures or different languages, we're finding that a lot of people have very similar issues that they're facing. So one of the issues that we've heard many people talk about is that they're burnt out. They've lost their energy, they can't be bothered anymore, and they start to see the negative in things. And then they get into a cycle where they see more and more negative, and then it sooner or later it ends up being 100% negative, and there's no room for positive thoughts and joy in their life. I wrote an article for Psychology Today about this cycle of negative thinking and how it's called loop thinking. We get in a loop and we just can't get out of it. And so that's something that we've seen all over the world, that people are having that challenge. People have also told us that they're lonely and they feel like many of their relationships are superficial. And that's probably partly because of lockdowns. We lost a lot of our social networks and connections. And it could also be for turning to so much social media that it's superficial and people aren't really feeling they're connecting. People have lost the purpose in their day. They don't feel connected to their work. And many people have lost trust in their leaders, be it in their government leaders or in their work leaders or in a lot of different people. And even in the future of where are we going? What's the direction of the country and that sort of thing. So some people can blame other people and say, this is the reason I'm stuck, or they keep looking at all the negatives. But then other people are proactively looking at trying to solve some of these issues. So what's important is that we don't address the symptoms like loneliness. We get to what's the real cause, what's the root cause of these challenges. And in our perspective, the root cause is the lack of meaning. So we should always keep that in mind. So for many years, we've been writing and speaking and advising about this crisis of meaning in our work life and society. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and frame the topic of meaning so that we can take a look at meaning from some different perspectives. So the first one is the meaning, looking at meaning from the macro or the micro point of view. So macro, we can look at it from the big question, what is the meaning of life? Is there a point to living, or is life absurd and pointless? And maybe a lot of people are turning to nihilism and feeling that there is no meaning to life, or is there a meaning to life? So you can look at it from the whole macro, sitting on the mountaintop, looking at the whole meaning of life, or we can look at it from the micro point, whereas we look at what is the meaning of my life, what is the meaning of my day, and what's happening to me, and then adding up all those meanings during our day to build a meaningful life for ourselves. So we like to focus more so on the meaning of my life and the meaning of our day, so that we can look at that question of, do I feel I'm living a meaningful life or not? The second point I want to say is that meaning is related to the word existential. So you might have heard that word, especially existential crisis. You hear that a lot on the media. In fact, dictionary.com in 2019 named existential as the word of the year, which is really interesting because that was before we even had the whole COVID event and that sort of thing. And so the challenges of COVID. So existential means, and it means concerning our existence. So we're different than animals since we can ponder this existence and try to decide if we have meaning in our life. But we also have, as we saw in Bill Nye in the movie, he could also challenge himself to look at, in the existential way, is that life is finite. It's a time limited offer. And so can we challenge it that way? We also sort of see when you're using the word meaning, it's really connected to the word purpose. A lot of people say we need more meaning and purpose, or more purpose and meaning. In our perspective, purpose is part of meaning, but meaning is a broader concept. Purpose is an aim or a goal, it's directional, whereas meaning has to do more of the core of who I am and how I'm interacting with other people, my attitudes, and do I have purpose in my life? So it's a bigger concept. You also see meaning related to the concept of happiness. So, and they're not, in our mind, they're not the same thing. Now, we're not against happiness, obviously, but happiness is an emotion and it's fleeting. And whereas meaning is a deeper concept, which we'll talk about obviously in this hour. It's difficult when you, Lonnie, if you put yourself also in, you deal with a lot in the medical area. If someone is suffering from cancer or a tough diagnosis, happiness isn't going to be the solution or that help people at that point. Could be happy in certain moments, but it's at those times when we want to ask the deeper questions about the meaning of life. And especially if someone's laid off or loses their job, we don't want to just say, we'll just be happy. That's not really going to solve the challenge. Another part of meaning is to not separate it into meaning of work. Meaning of work is being a very hot topic right now. We don't want to separate the person into their personal life and their work life. It's a fallacy to divide ourselves into here I am in one type of person in one environment and another type of person in another environment. The goal of life is to approach ourselves as a whole life and have the unity of self. And so that's something we want to talk about. The last point I want to make is about the definition of meaning. So there's a lot of different definitions, obviously, of this concept of meaning. But if we take a look at it at 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 would be meaning as far as a meaning of a word, what I intend to communicate. The second level would be significance. And significance means if something's important, does it matter to me? But we like to go up to level 3, which is resonance. So if we say something is significant and it matters to us, then we need to say, well, why? Why is this resonating with me? Why is it resonating with who I am as a person? It's resonating to me as a core. And then conversely, if something isn't meaningful for me, then it's not resonating with myself. It might be still important, but it's not resonating deeply within the core of who I am. So I want to take a look at those 3 definitions, and that starts to help frame this conversation about meaning. So I just want to say a few other comments. I just want to show a few books that we have. We've been writing and speaking and advising about meaning for many years. Both of us, both Alex Pattakos and myself, write for Psychology Today, and that's global online. So we strongly recommend you take a look at the articles that we've been writing for Psychology Today on the whole topic of meaning. Very obviously
It's a good marketing.
Yeah, it's good marketing. Okay, the second thing is I just want to hold this up. This is the Seeds of Innovation. This is the first book I wrote, and I just want to mention this is because we took a look at transformational thinking within this, and this was about to find creativity, but also to be more innovative. We need to gain greater awareness and ignite our passion and take some action. So that's.
I'm going to interject here a second. I can't hold myself back. I'm Greek heritage. No, but Elaine book, The Seeds of Innovation, she kind of very modest. I mean, the book was published by a publisher in the U.S. It's actually HarperCollins now, and the book was named when it came out the first year. It was a top 10 business book of the year by the Globe and Mail, for those of you who are Canadian, and the National Post. And so that's an important element because that was kind of the difference between this Elaine's book and these other books on innovation is that this was really the first book that was really focused on the human side of innovation. In other words, how do they come up with creative ideas? How do they end up getting back when their idea gets slammed and all of a sudden they're rejected? And how do they build that resilience to come back? How do you present the idea in a more effective way? And so that's what got us more into that transformational thing, because part of our philosophy is you can't have organizational or societal transformation without personal transformation. So when people are working in the workplace, personally, they also have to transform and they've got to look at things differently. And so I think I just want to point that out there. So it's another ploy for Elaine's book.
Okay, well, it wasn't really.
I got bonus points.
What's interesting about the book is I was working in corporate world and I'm going to say this because I can say this, is like I was very left brain and I was very task oriented, and I could plow through any project really quickly. But that was the first time I actually sort of put my toes into this whole water about the human side of work and the human side of looking at innovation and creativity. And that actually helped us get into more meaning. I'm just going to hold up the second book, the Oprah Way, Finding Joy and Meaning in Everyday Life and Work. And I'm going to touch on this one later on in my closing comments, just because this is about finding meaning in the simplicity of life. And so we really, I think all of us need this. And then the third one, I'm being Vanna White here. This is Prisoners of Our Thoughts. Alex and I both wrote this, the third edition of it. And I'm going to actually pass it over to Alex and let him take the floor to discuss Viktor Frankl and Prisoners of Our Thoughts. Third edition.
Third edition, good. But I'll have to go back to the beginning of the first edition. The difference, I think, in terms of what Elaine was pointing out about, people might find something significant and meaningful on one level, but it doesn't resonate with their true nature, their core essence. I've seen that a lot in the healthcare systems that I've worked with over the years. I know many medical doctors who hate their job. They don't like being a physician, but they do it. They know the job by definition is meaningful in terms, but at the same time, they have terrible doctor-patient relationships. And I think a lot of you, we touched a little bit about that before, about helping clinicians become more aware of that human dynamic. And so that's been part of my mission over the many, many years, because Viktor Frankl, who I'll get into here in just a second, his work in psychotherapy, he referred to it as a medical ministry, because his goal was to humanize mental health and healthcare. Dr. Frankl was a neurologist first, and then he moved into developing his psychiatric system of thought. And then, of course, he became more of an existential philosopher. And I'll explain a little bit the difference in how that impacted his path, his life path. My background is that I've always been interested in human motivation and what makes people tick. And ever since I was a little kid, I read Viktor Frankl's classic bestseller, Man's Search for Meaning, when I was in high school, maybe even in junior high school. And at that time, I was living in the States near a state mental hospital. And I was always intrigued by what went on the other side of the fence, the other side of the wall. Why did people go there, and what happened to them, and so forth. And this is a long time ago. And actually, it's almost like a scene from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the way that mental hospitals were administered and the services they provided was pretty inhumane. And the whole right to treatment movement came about when I was still doing that kind of work. But my interest, I ended up getting into that work when during the Vietnam War, I volunteered for the draft. I was very young. I was 19 years old, and a buddy and myself, we both wanted to save the world from communism. And so we both went to the Army recruiter, and we were promised that we would, if we volunteered, we would stay together for the whole tour of duty. As soon as we signed up, they sent him to Fort Dix, New Jersey. They sent me to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne. But after we all got out, actually after I got out, my friend was killed, and I'm blessed to be with you all today. And so, to me, the search for meaning was very, very personal, because that experience as a young, late teens, early 20s, what was this all about? And so I dedicated my life from that time on to particularly my brothers and sisters who didn't make it and who weren't able. And for those of you who know anything about the Vietnam War, when we came back to the States, and I was in the US, obviously I'm a dual Canadian American citizen, nobody said thank you for your service. I mean, we were baby killers. We were the worst of the worst. And I remember being told, as soon as you get off, you get out of the Army, make sure you get rid of and, grow your hair back and get rid of your uniforms and everything else. And don't tell anybody what you've been doing. So that was a major impetus for me in terms of understanding, what can I do to help humanity? And so in many ways, I went back to Viktor Frankl's work, because when I was in the service, I went from being kind of a grunt, which is basically a soldier, to being asked to train with a psychiatric unit. And I had some great teachers, but most of them were Freudian in their perspective. And I ended up doing, basically, I got trained as an Army counselor, and worked with not just the casualties of war in Vietnam, but also dependents. And then I worked in the stockade. So I worked with, the prisoners and so forth. So I got a chance to see an incredible variety. I mean, it wasn't like being in Auschwitz, as Dr. Frankl's 4 Nazi concentration camps brought realization to him, but it certainly brought me to understand, wait a minute, there's something not right here, and just regressing to understanding how they were potty trained wasn't enough. I needed to help people do something that gave them hope and a inspiration for the future. That's why Viktor Frankl's approach is referred to as height therapy as opposed to depth therapy. Depth therapy is like looking in and looking at your past doing a lot of regressive kind of analysis. And Frankl never said that that's totally bad. I mean, but he saw his approach as height therapy as being more complementary and augmenting potentially other types of interventions. And so I was drawn to that. And so when I got out of the military, I started working in a mental health system in the city of Chicago, and basically work with primarily schizophrenics. And again, if you ever want to know about people's perceptions of reality, work with a schizophrenic, because you never know from 1 minute to the next who they are, what they see, how they're going to behave, and so forth. And just using drugs wasn't enough. We wanted to really get and to understand people so that they didn't have to stay institutionalized. And so that really was an important element. And so from that path, working in mental health, I got eventually, I'm going to kind of cut this short as much as I can. You can tell them I've been a professor a long time, so I can talk for 16 weeks doing this. But basically what happened is that I became involved in an international nonprofit organization that was focused on elevating the human spirit in the workplace, which brought me all over the world. And one of the places it brought me to was Austria. And when I was in Austria, I'd already been communicating with Dr. Frankl by letter and very, very, very primitive email through his son-in-law, because Dr. Frankl was not, technically, computer was not his thing. And so I arranged when I was in Europe to go to Vienna and meet with him. And when I did that, that was another meaning, I call it a meaning milestone, because I not only was I blessed to be in the presence of Viktor Frankl, but I also had the opportunity to explain to him that I wanted to take his wisdom, his ageless wisdom, into the general population by writing a book that would ultimately be not just about the Nazi concentration camps, but it would be about contemporary life in the workplace and so forth, so that people can, who didn't want to read something depressing, because part of Man's Search for Meaning is about his experience in the camps. And so when I told him that that's the thing I wanted to do, he grabbed my arm and he said, "Alex, yours is the book that needs to be written." So that became kind of a tattoo on my soul, if you will. And so that became Prisoners of Our Thoughts, first edition. And when the book first came out, it was very interesting because literally within a couple of months, I get a call from a firm in Indonesia that was, again, you probably have to Google this. So most of you probably too young to know this, but there was a tsunami in Indonesia, in Banda Aceh, and it was horrific. And this consulting firm in Indonesia asked if they could use Prisoners of Our Thoughts as a training guide for the volunteers that were going to Indonesia to help with the survivors and the aftermath of the tsunami. Now, you have to understand that the tsunami killed over 250,000 people, and there were 90,000 that were dead under the age of 18. And so we're talking about horror here. And so to train these people that were coming from the US, Canada, and Europe to be volunteer aid workers in Indonesia, which was primarily a Muslim country, you couldn't have them coming in there and saying, "Okay, well, I'm here to introduce you to Christ," or whatever, and I happen to be an Orthodox Christian, but I'm just saying this, that would be inappropriate. And so the idea is that what we could do is how do we help people understand the deeper meaning, both the aid worker understanding the meaning of their presence in this, because most of them have never been in a war zone, they've never been in a horrific situation like a tsunami, and then also it would help the people that were there. And so I have a lot of photos and things like that of that whole experience, but that was the first major application of Prisoners of Our Thoughts, the principles in the book. And so I remember telling my publisher, our publisher now, I said, if the book doesn't sell one copy, that alone was worth writing and publishing the book. So that became and so we write a little bit about that in the early part of the book, in the preface. So let me get into this thing. Why did this happen? What was this all about? Well, Viktor Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist, originally a neurologist, who was a student of Sigmund Freud. And most of you know who Sigmund Freud is. And Sigmund Freud is known for the pleasure principle, which we translate as the will to pleasure. And that was his primary thrust for what motivates human beings. And Dr. Frankl, he thought about it and he studied it, and he was a good student, and he was a physician, a psychiatrist. But one day they were at a conference, and And somebody was challenging Dr. Freud's ideas. And so Dr. Freud turned to his protege here, and he said, Dr. Frankl, would you help me out here with this person? And so basically Frankl agreed with the criticism of that maybe the pleasure was not the primary motivation of human beings. So basically in those days, you get expelled from that school of thought. So he went to another school of thought that was founded by another psychiatrist by the name of Alfred Adler, which is really talking about the will to power, which effectively what that means is Adler's belief was that all human beings are born with feelings of inferiority, and they spend their entire lives trying to overcome their feelings of inferiority. And so that's called the will to power. And the primitive form of that, Dr. Frankl said, is the will to money. People who are obsessed with money, typically there's something behind it that they feel insecure about and so forth. So Frankl studied under Adler, and he had the same kind of discord. And so Adler expelled Frankl from that school. So here he is walking in the snowy streets of Vienna, Austria. He's all alone. He says, well, I don't know what other school to go to, so I might as well start my own. So he decided to come up with a system that he felt that the primary intrinsic motivation of all human beings is the search for meaning. And that became the foundation for his school of thought called logotherapy. Now, this is an important element because for us, logotherapy is based on the root word, the Greek word, logos. And the logos means not only rationale, reason, so forth, but the logos goes back to meaning. So it's called therapy through meaning. But then Frankl, unlike most people, and that's one of the reasons why Dr. Frankl and I resonated, is that he also believed that logos, because he was very also influenced by the ancient Greeks, is that the logos also in the pre-Socratic sense means soul or spirit. So in that way, it was a spirit-oriented therapy. All right. And so that became a very important point. Well, for all of you listening, the logos is also the root word of the word dialogue. So if you think about dialogue as having, not just we're in a group trying to understand the deeper meaning of some concept or some idea or some issue, but it also means that we're trying to form a pool of common spirit. And so we have to resonate with each other. And I bet you everybody listening to this has been in a meeting sometime, whether it's with family or at work, in which they really were kind of transparent, they were vulnerable, they were just sharing, they didn't judge each other, they really were in a state of flow. And all of a sudden, somebody who you don't like, or maybe a boss comes in or supervisor, and all of a sudden they come in and the energy in the room tanks. Why does that happen? They've lost that spiritual connection. And so to Frankl, that was really important. Well, a lot of the criticisms over the years is that type of therapy was not evidence-based, quote unquote, cognitive therapy. It was more of a philosophy of life and a philosophy of work. That's okay for me because, as Elaine and I say, we consider ourselves to be philosophers of meaning. We're totally resonating with Dr. Frankl's approach. So what we did is we took his system of logotherapy, which does, by the way, now have many, there've been theses and doctoral dissertations written about it. There's been all kinds of studies done. So we're proud to say that there's an empirical basis, and we have logotherapy institutes all around the world. But basically, we took and we distilled his body of work, which is voluminous, and we distilled it into 7 principles. And the 7 principles of logotherapy is really what this book that we hope you all read. Hopefully, some of you have read this already. I know Lonnie has. But the foreword to our book was written by Dr. Stephen Covey, the late Dr. Stephen Covey, not his son. And a lot of people thought, oh, geez, 7 principles. They must be like Covey's the 7 habits. No, it's not the 7 habits. It's the 7 principles of logotherapy, because Viktor Frankl was also a major driver, major influencer on Stephen Covey's life and his work too. So, there's a lot of connections here that, can't get into now. They can see why we want to have a whole course on this. So let me kind of share with you what these 7 principles are in brief. And I'm looking at our clock here. Okay, good. The one that's probably the most well-known, all of you would know if you're familiar at all with Viktor Frankl's life and his legacy, is that he was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps. And most people, when we first worked on this project of doing the book, most people said, Viktor Frankl, he was a Jewish psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps because he had a good attitude. Well, I mean, that's clearly minimizing and marginalizing the depth of his knowledge and his wisdom. But that is the first principle, because what he said, and to be more accurate, he said that all of us, and he found this out obviously in the camps, all of us have an ultimate freedom. And right now we're all going through different things. I mean, COVID has caused issues. We've got all kinds of, craziness in the financial sector. We have craziness in the energy sector, climate change, all these things. But one of the things that Dr. Frankl said, well, none of this stuff is going to be as bad as obviously being in a Nazi concentration camp. Although some of us living in Canada sometimes wonder if that's, happening. But the idea is that he said, we all have the ultimate freedom, no matter how much is taken away from us as human beings, we all have the ultimate freedom to choose our attitude. All right, so that became a very important tenet of logotherapy, the one that people are most familiar with and the ones that they associate with Viktor Frankl. Now, Stephen Covey wrote the foreword to our book, and he has a quote in there that actually was not Dr. Frankl's, but it's attributed to him a lot. And it's basically saying that between stimulus and response, there's a space. Within that space, lies our basically our decision, our response to that stimulus. And then based on our response is the driver for our growth and our happiness. So, that is very consistent with Viktor Frankl's thinking, because it's really about how are we going to respond to things? What's our responsibility, but what's our capacity, resilience, et cetera, et cetera. So that first principle is the thing that kind of drives the rest of the principles in our book, and the things that probably are going to drive the things for most of us in terms of how we would practice logotherapy. The second principle is really the one that goes back to the challenges that Frankl had with Dr. Freud and Dr. Adler, and that is that he believes that realizing the will to meaning is one of the key elements of all of us as human beings. And what does that mean? That means that the will to meaning is us, each of us individually, and even collectively, committing authentically to meaningful values and goals, things that actually mean something to us, something that does resonate, as Elaine said. And to the extent that we have that as our focus, rather than power or money, or rather than just pleasure, that we can build a better world for ourselves, our families, our neighborhoods, our states, provinces, our countries, hopefully the world. Well, we're seeing now, there's a lot of distrust in the media, there's distrust in government, there's distrust in big pharma, there's distrust in, the war machine that's driving other kinds of geopolitical conflicts. And all those things are really manifestations of the will to power, and in some cases, the will to pleasure. And so we need to move our compass, as Viktor Frankl would say, towards meaning, to actualize those meaningful values and goals that only we can accomplish ourselves. We need to do that. And so that's something that we have to do individually as well as collectively. The next principle, that's principle number 2. There's a whole chapter in each of these with examples and exercises. The third one is detecting the meaning of life's moments. And that is basically understanding that, as Frankl would say, that there's a seed of meaning in every moment of our lives to our very last breath. Matter of fact, he would say, we don't even know after we pass whether or not, there's more meaning to be found beyond that, because we don't really know that. We don't know what's like on the other side, unless, maybe you've had a seance and you've gone to the other side. I don't know who's watching, but the point is, even though I do believe in metaphysics and so forth, I'm going to say for this life that we're in, that it's really up to us to discover the seed of meaning in every situation, even if it's something negative. You're diagnosed with an incurable or a very serious disease. You're in an accident. You serve in the military, you go through hell. And it could be as simple as a seed of meaning of you're a high school student and you didn't get the grades you want to get into university, or, you didn't get a job promotion. I mean, all these crises, all these moments are on a continuum of severity. I mean, obviously, they're not all going to be being a prisoner of war or a prisoner in a concentration camp. But the thing is, they're all human experiences, part of the human condition. And what Frankl would say is it's up to us personally to realize, all right, and detect that it's our responsibility to find the meaning, the seed of meaning in that. And if you believe that there's meaning in every one of those moments of life, then there's more to life than just existing, as Elaine was saying in that movie that she was referring to. So detecting the meaning of life's moments is very important. And we have exercises in the book. We have an exercise called existential digging on how you can do this, some practical examples. Also, back in the first one on the exercise of freedom to choose your attitude, we have exercises in there and examples that include everything from inmates serving on death row to people that are have different say health conditions, incurable diseases, and so forth, lost their job, you name it. And what's going on in the last 3 years, there's certainly plenty of information and plenty of examples that we can draw upon. And I know all of you listening to this, watching this, know people, probably yourself as well, that are inspirational role models for others. You know, you've been through hell. I know some of you already, you know, that are here, you've been through situations that nobody wants to have anybody else go through that experience, but I know you've gone through it. You are going through it, and you're helping others go through it, and you're a role model. And that's part of what this human quest for meaning is all about. The fourth principle is one that all of us seem to have a challenge with, and it's referred to in Frankl's work as paradoxical intention. And what that means is that many times we are our worst enemy. We work against ourselves. We're so obsessed, we're so fixated on accomplishing some goal, some objective, that we actually stumble over. I remember years ago, there was, when I used to watch Saturday Night Live, there was cases where people, you know, falling all over themselves, you know, or maybe, you know, you're so obsessed with getting a promotion that you get your supervisor angry and you make a big mistake or something. And sometimes you just got to let go. You got to, you know, it takes, you know, don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. Relax a little bit. Take, get some distance from yourself so that you don't obsess to the point where it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's something to think about. Don't work against yourself. The fifth one is another one that's important for us as human beings, because as Elaine was pointing out, you know, we're unique living entities. And this one here is actually, this one here is actually called self-detachment, which basically means that as human beings, we could look at ourselves from a distance. And, you know, we can actually separate ourselves, not just from a situation, but separate ourselves from ourselves. I mean, have you ever had that experience? We say, oh my God, why did I say that? Why did I do that? Or, you know, one of my favorite, comedians was Rodney Dangerfield, the late Rodney Dangerfield. You know, he used to go around and he made an entire comedy routine over poking fun at himself. He used to say, I don't get no respect. All right, most of us don't want to do that. You know, we want people to actually feel that we're so great. But sometimes, you know, we have to realize that we have to not basically work against ourselves and look at ourselves from a distance. And so when we think about our pets, for example, just give us a quick example. Even if you have a dog, say, that you think smiles, it's probably not smiling at itself, right? And so maybe they're going to correct me in this and say, you know, when I have a dog that smiles to herself or himself, the idea is we can do that. We can actually imagine ourselves. And that's one of the ways that Frankl was able to actually get himself through the camp, horrific camp experience during the war, was able to actually separate himself, not only from the situation he was in, but also be able to not work against himself, but being so obsessed with getting out of the camp. He took it and was able to take care of other prisoners and so. And then the sixth one, I'm almost done here. Hearing little bells here. The sixth one is shift your focus of attention. This is called de-reflection. This has been a big one for the last 3 years, is because some of us, in light of what's been going on with the pandemic, et cetera, to shift your focus of attention to something more positive is a critical thing for us in order to manage stress and to get through this, in order to not, as Elaine said, exist, but to actually try to live a life in spite of all the obstacles that have come across our path. And then the seventh principle is the one that's probably the most metaphysical, spiritually oriented. It actually relates to self-transcendence. It's extend beyond yourself. This is actually, don't look at yourself as being the center of the universe, which unfortunately in this day and age with selfies and everything else, we kind of become very narcissistic looking in the way we operate and thrive and live in the world. But really, self-transcendence is really, whether you believe in any religious doctrine, denomination, or have any faith-based orientation, the idea of being able to say that it's not all about me is a very important element. And Viktor Frankl wrote another book based on this concept called Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, because he felt that that was something that was beyond the current situation that we're in. So those 7 principles become kind of the framework of logotherapy that we, to do justice to logotherapy's full body of work. Obviously, we've distilled it into these 7 simple, easier to remember kinds of concepts and practices. But the idea is that to make this thing something that people can actually understand, so they don't say, well, what the heck is logotherapy? Well, this is what it's about. And if you want more, you can go get an entire certificate in training in logotherapy and become a therapist in these principles. But the idea is that we want this to, as I told Dr. Frankl, we want this to be mainstream. We want everybody to feel that they can have access, they can have some control over what's happening in their life. So is my time up here?
No, Alex, you have another 3 hours.
No, okay, all right.
Just
But
kidding.
yeah. So the idea, I'm going to pass it over to Elaine now, but I'm just saying that the idea here is that this is an important element for all of us, is that you have to believe, one, that you are capable of responding to life's challenges. And we're obviously getting a lot of challenges, that you're capable of doing that. And you got to believe that. I mean, if you don't believe in that, it's kind of like saying in Elaine's book, The Seeds of Innovation, if you don't believe you're creative, guess what? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not creative. I can't come up with an idea. Well, the same thing here. If you believe that that life has more to offer, it's up to you to respond, because what life is doing is life is calling you to respond to the challenges. And it's not about, oh, I'm just going to go out there and find my bliss. It's not about that. That's one of the reasons why we kind of moved away from the happiness idea, because that was misinterpreted. The happiness literature that was started, which became ingrained and a part of what's called positive psychology, was based on a concept that was an ancient Greek concept from Aristotle. And that concept was misinterpreted by a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, because he kind of, and it was probably not just him, I mean, it was more like the people that interpreted his work and saying that Aristotle was saying that, this is happiness, when in fact it's not. It was a much more deeper concept that really was more meaning focused. And so, and it was always like, oh, if I could just be happy, life is great. And as Elaine said, well, you may not be happy if you're in a war zone. You're not going to be happy if you're in Ukraine right now. You're not going to be happy if you have a disease, or, if you had an illness, or you lost a loved one. And so there's still meaning in those situations. And that's why one of my friends and colleagues in Toronto, Dr. Paul Wong, W-O-N-G, you can look him up, came up with a notion of PP, which is positive psychology 2.0. And it was basically, how do you balance these ups of life, which are the ones that we see as, typical happiness, hedonistic happiness, with the suffering that we all have to go through, because suffering is part of the human condition. And so, to think that we're only going to be happy all the time is totally an illusion. And obviously, Viktor Frankl learned that. I've learned that in my life. Elaine has. And that's what we try to write about. We try to write the stories. And the beauty of the third edition of the book, and I will now be quiet, but the beauty of the third edition is it encompasses and incorporates people who've actually read the book. And then they shared those stories with us, and then we incorporate them in the book. So the first edition was just kind of like hypotheticals. I came up with individuals that were in certain situations, and I had to make sure that I wasn't letting people know that, oh, that was my neighbor, or that was my sister, or whatever like that. I had to make sure that there was, but now we actually had people that actually practiced the principles that were in the book, and we included them in the later edition, including the best one, which is the one that was co-authored with Elaine. So Elaine, I'm going to pass the over to you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm just going to Lonnie, I'm going to shorten my comment so that we have some time to take some questions, but just want to comment on two things that just to build on what Alex has shared, is that and the key thing is when we talk about Viktor Frankl and the message that he's most known for is we always have the freedom to choose our attitude in any situation. What I think is really important there is to emphasize in that even if we can't change the situation, we can always change our attitude and choose our attitude. And I think that's really important, because a lot of us do try to change situations. We try to change other people. We try to, change situations, wish they didn't happen, fight against things, find the negativity, etc. And sometimes it's very valuable for us to step back and say, this is life. Life has its ups and downs, its joys and sorrows, and I can't change the situation. So I am challenged to find my own attitude, and hopefully an attitude that will help me in my health and my well-being, and then also help me have the resilience to go through whatever I'm going through, but also help other people that are around me. So I just wanted to mention that. And the other thing, actually, just on Prisoners of Our Thoughts, which we usually talk about when we have a little more time, is when we launched the third edition of this book, we were traveling around a lot to airports, and a lot of people, we would say, well, we had this book called Prisoners of Our Thoughts, and always somebody would say, oh, my wife could really use that. or, oh, my husband could really use that, or, oh, my brother could really use that. And it was never about for themselves, which was always funny that we always came across that situation. But important thing is that we don't hold other people prisoner of our thoughts, that people do change, people do go through different experiences, and that maybe they're not the same person they were 4 years ago. And so that we take a fresh look at how people are evolving themselves, but importantly, not to hold ourselves prisoner of our thoughts, that we can learn and grow, and that we don't feel, we forgive ourselves for some of the decisions that we've made in the past that maybe weren't the wisest decisions, or maybe we weren't the kindest person, and that we don't hold ourselves prisoners of our thoughts. So, Alex.
Yeah, and let me just build on what Elaine just said. There's a line, a phrase in Prisoners of Our Thoughts that says, you can change without growing, but you can't grow without changing. So think about that for a second. We all know people who, many years, we've known them, say 25 years ago, and what they were like and so forth. And then we see them 25 years later. Some people have gone through a lot of growth. All right. And with maybe many or maybe not so many changes, but we know a lot of other people. I have known a lot of people who've gone through many changes in relationships, changes in where they live, changes in jobs, etc. But they're the same person in terms of their mindset and their worldview as they were 25 years ago. So the idea is it's not enough to change, and that's why we see a lot of people, they jump from job to job, place to place, et cetera, but somehow they're not learning and growing from their various life situations. So there is an exercise in the chapter on that in the book that helps you go through that process, so you can end up questioning and really understanding more deeply the deeper meaning behind every one of these situations.
Great. So I'm just going to move on and just take a few more minutes just to touch on our new work in the whole area of meaningology. So meaningology, is our definition, is the study and practice of meaning in life, work, and society. And what we're doing is we're taking all our learning from the seeds, from Prisoners of Our Thoughts, from the Opal Way, for all our advising and that sort of thing. And we've incorporated in a new book along with new information on metaphysical sciences, noetic sciences, philosophy, psychology, etc. And so it's a really practical way of looking at living with meaning. So I'm looking at the time, so I'm just going to add a few ending comments. Is that I know a lot of people out there, or maybe not in our group, but in the world, are really frustrated. And I like to turn frustration into a positive, because I think when we're frustrated, it's actually a good sign that we want something to be different. We want something to change, and we want something more, and maybe we want more meaning in our life. So sometimes frustration is good because it's a signal to our intuition that we're not happy with the situation, and we need to look at what can we change. We also need to look at what are we blocking as far as unresolved feelings. They're going to get in the way of us living a full life if we don't forgive ourselves, as I said before, and forgive others. And we also have to look at, why do people not change? Is it fear? Is it fear of shaking up things and changing your life or the life of people around you? Are you afraid of taking off your masks and being more authentic? Are you afraid that you might have to give up something in order to change? And in order to change, though, and find more meaning, we have to give up something. So something's going to have to be changed in our current life, whether it's our comfort and how we approach that, whether it's we have to learn new skills, whether we have to put ourselves out there. Maybe we don't belong with one group and we have to say goodbye to that one group to find people that we really do resonate with, etc. So a lot of times people don't step back and say, why am I not changing? Why am I stuck? What are the real fears that are holding me back? So in order to live a really meaningful life, we do have to do that self-reflection. We have to learn to know ourselves better. We have to know what resonates with us and what doesn't. And a lot of times people are afraid to tell other people, or admit to themselves and then tell other people that I don't want the word no, I don't want to do that anymore. That doesn't resonate with me anymore. I've outgrown this. I want to do something different. So we have to look at our lives in the bigger patterns of what's working, what isn't working, what kind of behaviors do I keep repeating that isn't really what I want to do, and try to figure out what would fill your heart with joy. And that's also looking beyond yourself. It's not all about you, me, 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 me. It's about how we can contribute to making other people's lives happier and to impact something greater than us. So I'm going to come full circle with an exercise that if you were to look at a movie and it was about your life, what would be the name of your movie? Is something to think about. And we don't have a lot of time to talk about that, but maybe I'll shorten it to, if you had a choice of only 2 titles for the movie of your life, one is living and one is existing. So far, which title would you pick? Something to think about.
Speaking of movies.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to recommend a movie that's an existential movie. It's a comedy, a romantic comedy, I guess. That's old now, but I mean, it's old if you're younger than me, and not so old if you're me, I guess. But it's a movie called Defending Your Life, and it was with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. And I'm not sure exactly the year. I should have looked that up. But it's really involves so many of the things we just discussed tonight about moving towards from existing to living. And it involves the things Elaine was talking about. It involves taking risk in order to find deeper meaning. And if anybody has seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's got a metaphysical component to it, spiritual component to it. It's got some real work-related issues and obviously relationship issues that people have to work with, including all the issues about fear that we all, everybody is, doesn't want to show their vulnerability or whatever. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to recommend that since Elaine was talking about movies.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say 2 more sentences, Lonnie, and then I promise to send it over to you. But
We got lots of time. You don't have to rush.
Okay, well, we're finding more and more people are asking about this topic of meaning, and our goal is to demystify this topic of meaning and have it more, I guess, on the same wavelength as, all these happiness books. There should be more and more books on meaning, because as we go through all these changes, and especially from the last 3 years, a lot of people are frustrated and they feel stuck and that sort of thing. And now the good news is no one needs to be stuck forever. There is help. Life changes all the time, so we're not in a permanent existential crisis. But if we can ask and reach out to other people, there's a concept in psychology called Johari window, and it's really the concept that we think we know ourselves, but sometimes we need other people to help and input and guide us. And so if people are feeling extremely stuck, we urge everybody to, those people to reach out to a psychiatrist, psychologist, a counselor, a doctor, whatever, to get some help. And then no matter where people are, I think this whole concept of asking questions about the meaning of our life, not waiting till we're on our deathbed and then having some regrets. I think it's great that we're looking at it throughout all the years of our life to say that there is a source of hope. If we look, as Alex says, to height psychology, to hope, to the positive, to say I can get out of whatever rut I'm in and I can find some meaning in our suffering, but also if I'm stuck, how do I get out of this and look to the future, to something that's gonna bring more meaning to my life and make me feel like my life matters to me and matters to other people. So
and the fact that you do that helps to establish you as an inspirational role model for others.
Mhm.
It's kind of that one movie, I think was it Tom Hanks, whatever it's, I Want What She Has. I can't remember what the one
Harry
is.
and Sally.
Yeah, Harry and Sally. If you're happy, if you're joyful, if you feel fulfilled, you show it. Your energy field is very uplifting. And then people say, well, geez, what are they doing? As opposed to being somebody that looks like they're just existing. They say, well, I don't even want to be around that, because those are energy vacuums. They suck your energy. You want to be around people, and you want to be a model for people to feel that you're exporting energy, so they realize that, wait a minute, I want to be like her. I want to be like him. I want to be like these people that I see seem to be having a life that's meaningful. And that's what the ancient Greeks referred to as the good life. The good life was not really just happiness. The good life was a meaningful life. It was The Greek word that became the happiness literature driver. In English, it's actually eudaimonia, eudaimonia. In Greek, it's actually eudaimonia, which actually is about inner and outer prosperity. And it's not, and it was translated by some of the people in, like I said, at the university level in the States to mean happiness. And that was not what it's about, because happiness, there's deep happiness, there's enjoyment, and then there's hedonistic happiness, which is basically, I'm going to shop until I drop. I'm going to go out and get, drink as much as I can and party and dance. That's not what the ancient Greek Aristotle was talking about.
So Lonnie, is there anything you'd like to ask?
Yeah, before we get to the questions, so thanks both. That was a great summary of your book and adding some nuance to it. I just wanted to mention something before we get to the few questions. And again, those in on the call, please put in your questions in the chat, or later you can unmute yourself if you're comfortable doing that. I just want to make a note that I really appreciated in the book. Two things that came to mind is one, that you mentioned Epicurus and how he's misunderstood as an ancient. I really like him, probably of all of the ancient Greeks. He's probably the one I resonate most with, of that good life, right? It's a humble life. Like the good things that you're eating are, cold water and figs, and like very humble things. You're not being hedonistic, is the complete opposite. I appreciated that Elaine in the book, you talked about sort of minimalism in a sense. And that's been a huge wave in the last, 10 years or so in the Western world. So that's been really great. And I really appreciated in the book, just the idea of prisoner thoughts, of how we can think of other people and their personas that we've constructed end up creating these types of prisons for us. And so when we look at certain people in our lives, whether it's colleagues or people within our inner circle, and we already assume what they're going to say, or before we even take a chance that they might change over time. And so that's very limiting. And of course, then it responds to us as the prisoner, ultimately. So I thought that was it's a great book, everyone. We have it at the library. You can buy copies.
I also say that's applicable to our families. I think a lot of times we hold family members, because we have so much history, we hold family members prisoners of our thoughts.
Absolutely. So let me start reading out the questions. The first person asks, is meaning intrinsic to humans, or do we make it up? Is meaning intrinsic to humans?
Yeah, is it intrinsic to humans? Well, I mean, a dog can find meaning. I remember there was a cartoon of a dog on the search for meaning, and basically the search for meaning was, give me my food. I'm hungry, kind of a thing. And so it was very, very simplistic. But the idea is, I think that in terms of the intrinsic character of human beings, we have a capacity which we don't always employ. That's part of what Elaine's and what we're doing with our work, and that's hopefully what should be happening in libraries and in universities and high schools and grade schools and so forth, is helping people understand what the Greeks would say is, the unexamined life is not worth living. Know thyself. A lot of times we don't focus on that. And so what happens is that we wait until we're later in life, and then we say, well, is that all there is? Do I have a bucket list? I got to go do things quickly before I pass. And so the idea of it being intrinsic, it's intrinsic to the human condition to explore our inner humanness, if you will, our humanity, our sense of humanity. And when we lose sight of that, that's when the moral compass goes off to power or to pleasure. But if we focus on meaning, and we all have that capacity, we all have the capacity to go look within. The question is, are we willing to go there? We have many people that are afraid. We've had clients, we've had family members, we've had friends, we've had coworkers who basically, they won't go there. It means I have to expose myself. That's why I'm asking everybody to go, if you've seen it, see it again, the movie Defending Your Life, because it's about that. It's about the fear of not wanting to go explore your innermost vulnerabilities and thoughts, because that's how you're going to end up understanding more about know thyself, and you're going to end up learning more about how to connect and stay connected to that core essence, that true nature that we all have. And that's why I would recommend this person read the other book that we have on meaning, The Opal Way, because that goes back to the ancient Greek philosophers as well as the mythology behind the human quest for meaning, because it was Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, student of Socrates, who's known to attributed to have the quote, man, and he means man in a generic sense, man, a being in search of meaning. And that was really kind of carried through all the millennia and centuries later, all the way through Viktor Frankl in our work today. So yes, it is intrinsic, and it is something that we don't have to create it. We have to discover it. It's there. It's, as Frankl said, there's a seed of meaning in every moment, but it's up to us to take personal responsibility to go look for it and find it.
Okay, so I'm going to just add to that is that there's normally two ways to look at things, intrinsically or extrinsically. Intrinsic comes from inside, extrinsic comes from outside. So yes, meaning in Alex's view is intrinsic. It's going to be different for you versus everybody else. So it does come from inside. Whether or not you make it up is, I would say, are we interpreting what's happening to us? And so, yes, we interpret what is happening to us based on our mindset at the time. So the way I interpret or find meaning in something 10 years ago, and I really cared about it, and it just really resonated with me, and now I couldn't even care about it. So meaning changes based on how my perspective and my mindset. So I'm going to say it's intrinsic, and then we interpret it based on where our mindset and where our spirits are at the time.
Yeah, but at the same time, that your core essence, I'm going to say, it does not change. So what's happening is, as you evolve, as you become smarter, you have more experience, you become more, whether it's spiritual, more metaphysical, whatever it may be, however you want to look at it, your ability to do the discovery process that Elaine's talking about is enhanced. So whether you go to an ashram and spend 6 months in a silent retreat, or whether or not you do, the mindfulness meditation training that we now refer to in a more modern age, contemporary age here, those are all tools. Viktor Frankl said something that's really powerful. It's in the book. He said, we all have coping mechanisms that we can learn. We can go take self-help courses, we can read books, et cetera, et cetera. When he went to the Nazi concentration camps, he did something that was kind of overarching those mechanisms. He called it a coping maxim. That means is that he committed to himself when he entered the camps, and he called this his coping maxim, not a coping mechanism, that maxim was his basic framework, his basic philosophy, that whatever happens, he will survive this experience, this horrific experience, and he will be able to get back to his family, to his work, whatever. That mindset is what helped drive him. So then he used whatever mechanisms he could learn from others and from his experience in the past, et cetera, to help get through this. So you need to have a mindset that's basically saying that life is meaningful, and I will find the meaning. But you're responsible for looking for it. But that is an intrinsic capacity as human beings that we all have. Not everybody exercises it. And Elaine's saying, as you evolve, that's why as you grow older, ideally, the more experience you have, the more likely you're going to understand what really matters to you. And people ask me, well, what is meaningful for me? What is meaning to me, Alex? And I go, okay, well, one way of looking at it, say in a relationship or at work, is reverse that question and say, what is meaningless to you at work? What is meaningless to you in your relationship? What is meaningless to you where you live? Because more people they have an easier time identifying what's the meaningless things that they do at work, the meaningless things they do in school, the meaningless things they do, in their personal relationships. And it's from that you can make that list and you can convert that. And there's exercises in the book on how you do that, but you have to believe. It sounds, it's the difference between faith and reason, right? Some of the things that we talk about here are empirically based, empirically grounded. They're very rational, but there are other things that are intuitive. And when you start to trust your intuition, you're moving into a different realm, a different plane. And that's the metaphysical. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can also go to a website for the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And noetic, by the way, is another Greek word. But it's about it's about consciousness. It's about elevating your consciousness and seeing things from a new light. And I think, as Elaine's saying, yes, 20 years later, you might look at something different, but your basic essence is the same. Your core essence is the same. It's kind of like, instead of seeing life as a trajectory or a curve, it's like a spiral staircase. And when you were incarnated, when you were born on this planet, you're down at level 0, say. And then maybe 10 years later, you're at level 2. And then if you live to be 100, you're up here, hopefully. All right. Sometimes you go back down a floor or 2, and then you go back up. But the idea is, if you look down that spiral staircase, that's where you started. And that's who you are. And so you spend your whole life, as Viktor Frankl said, the meaning of life is a search for meaning. And the search for meaning is you have to continue to look, and hopefully all of us get a chance to move up the staircase where we can see. It's kind of like seeing things differently when you're in an airplane than when you're on the ground. And these are the kinds of perceptive issues that all of us, we do have. If I don't believe you have the capacity, I mean, if Viktor Frankl didn't believe in it, I mean, he wouldn't have spent his whole life being an inspirational role model for finding meaning after all the things. And this is part of what the meaningology is. It's a study and practice of meaning. And it's not just for individuals in their lives, it's also in the workplace, and it's also society. We have a major problem politically, geopolitically. And that's going to be another.
The first question.
That's another. Yeah, that's the first question. How many more questions we have? 100.
Thank you. Here, I'll read them quick. While trying to maintain a positive mindset, what safeguards can you adopt to prevent extremes? So they give the example of toxic positivity or delusional optimism.
Yes. Well,
I just want to add one thing.
Go ahead.
In psychology, there is a concept that it takes 8 or 9 positive comments to offset a negative one.
Mhm.
So we default to, like, when you think back to school, maybe you got your exam back and you got 80%, let's say you got 80% on your exam. The tendency is not to look at where you got the 80%. The tendency is to look at where did you not get the 20%, and where did you go wrong on the test. So that's an analogy to say that we take in a lot and we are more attuned to negative comments, and we react more emotionally to negative comments. So sometimes I think when we say, there's too much positivity, I just wanted to couch, Alex going to answer now, but I just want to couch that sometimes it's not a 1-for-1. We do need a lot more positivity in our life.
for those of you who look us up on Psychology Today, I have an article in there that deals with toxic positivity. And so just something you might want to look at. And then it's basically where you're getting into this, where, everything is through this rose-colored glasses and so forth. Obviously, we have to be realistic as well. What Viktor Frankl came up with, and this is also in the book, Lonnie, you probably remember this, he refers to true optimism. And he says true optimism, it really involves 4 different elements. Okay, the first one is obviously having a positive attitude of something, and it's like putting something, I will do this, I will get a promotion, I will graduate, I will, lose weight. I mean, whatever it may be, having a positive, basically a positive affirmation, if you will. But it's not enough to affirm. I mean, a lot of people put these magnets on the refrigerators to remind them to be positive. That's not enough. So, right. So being able to have a positive affirmation is important. The second element is to be able to visualize, all right, what options you have. What if you did something following your positive affirmation, visualize what would that look like? What would the outcome of that be? And so the issue is that some of us can't think. We may need some training in creative visualization in order to see that, because we're stuck. We've got a creative block. All right, and then I'll just narrow it down to 3, because the third one is really is having the passion or the enthusiasm in order to make what you visualize as possible a reality. And again, if we go back to the ancient Greek, the English word enthusiasm comes from 2 Greek words. It actually means manifesting the God or the spirit or the divine within. So when people are enthusiastic, they're actually manifesting their spirit, their human spirit. And a lot of, and I remember years ago when I worked in the mental health system, we used to give kids a lot of Ritalin because we felt they were hyperactive. And the reality is many of these kids are just enthusiastic. They're manifesting their spirit. And what we're going to do is we're going to crush that with, with drugs. So the idea is that being a true optimist is also being, having some degree of reality. You'll say, what can I accomplish? If you have a major disability and you're visualizing, I'm going to win the pole vault in the next Olympics. There's some balancing in there, but you still have to keep that positive, upbeat attitude, because it's been proven. There's incredible literature on this about people succumbing to disease, doing things that end up resulting in harm to them, even their death, because they had a bad attitude, a negative attitude. And so, there's a balance, but that's where you can go and get somebody to help you maintain some sort of balance in your thinking.
That's great. Yes. The next question, I'll answer this one. Yes, I will send out the link once the recording's up on YouTube, so not to worry. The next one, this is an interesting one. When should we draw the lines in terms of changing the situation versus our attitude? How do we know when to change our attitude?
Well, I'm going to give you my view, and Elaine can give you hers as well. When we see people, I remember going to a lot of companies, organizations, and it was like a scene from another movie that I saw years ago called The Sixth Sense. And I go into the organization, I could say, I see dead people. They're working at their cubicle, their desk, whatever, but they're really not alive. They're existing. And actually now we have this new concept or this new term, quiet quitting. You've probably heard of that. And people are really kind of like not fully engaged. They're just putting in the time, they're getting the paycheck or whatever. And so the idea is that when you start to see yourself, your energy level, when you start to see your enthusiasm become less over time, and then it's more than likely that's the time where you have to decide. How you do a cost benefit analysis and say, look, I'm bored at my job. I don't really like it. But if you don't have an alternative, you don't have the resources to do something else, you might have to stick around for a while, and then you'll have to change your attitude and say, okay, you'll go to work and say zippity doo dah, I'm going to try to be positive about an upbeat. But I know a lot of people that can't do that. And so they have to quit or move on to something else. But there's a definition of consciousness that I've used many, many times over the years that basically said that consciousness is a relationship between the observed and the observer. All right. So if you're conscious of something, and you want to change your consciousness, you either have to change what you're observing. You got to look at your boss, your relationship differently. All right. You do date night. I don't know, whatever the heck it may be. Right. Or you could change your own position. All right. So you'll move to another relationship, another job. You'll look at things from a different vantage point. So that can help you shift your consciousness, maybe so you can tolerate something until something else comes up and allows you an escape, if you will. But the key is to not be a prisoner of your thoughts, to be as flexible as you can, to look at different avenues. And that's one of the reasons we wrote Prisoners of Our Thoughts. That's one of the reasons why we're doing meanology, is to enable people, to give them practical guideposts to meaning. But it's still up to you to take the journey. It's like, you've got to walk the trail, baby. You got to figure out, well, maybe I got to walk by myself. Other times I got to bring a group with me because I'm scared and nervous, afraid of going out there in the wilderness by myself. We talk about it in Prisoners of Our Thoughts. It's like walking into the Greek Cretan labyrinth. We call it the labyrinth of meaning. You're walking into that labyrinth and you're going to turn that turn. You have no idea if the Minotaurs are ready to eat you. So you might have to have somebody with you. You might have to have Ariadne's thread. So if you got to retreat, you know how to get back out. But the idea is that you're personally responsible for doing that journey. And if you don't take it, that's your life, baby.
Yes, that's great. 4 questions, 1 comment. Thank you for a great presentation. I'll be getting your books. That's nice. Next question. Are some people born with an innate sense of purpose or meaning?
Well, there's different views on that. If we look at, there are some children, for example, that are born that immediately people recognize them as potentially the Dalai Lama. All right, they see on a spiritual plane. They're very wise at a very young age. And I'm not talking about wise in terms of cognitive knowledge. I'm talking about that they're very spiritually evolved. And then we know other people that are 100 years old that really don't seem to have grown at all over the years, right? So the idea is, I think some people, this is where we're going to get into metaphysics and into the spiritual plane. And when we are incarnated as a physical being, the saying in metaphysics is we're basically spiritual beings having a physical experience. And if you're a nihilist and you don't believe, and you're a traditional existentialist and you don't believe that life has anything other than what we're doing today, then you're more likely to fall into the will to pleasure, the will to power kind of routines, because you figure there's nothing left after that. But if you believe in something beyond yourself, which is the 7th principle, extend beyond yourself, it's self-transcendence. If you believe in that, then that's gonna guide you at a different level. So I think, again, if the more metaphysical you are, and I don't know how many of you have an interest in metaphysics, the more likely. And that's why meanology is going to also have a big dose of metaphysical. We call it metaphysical sciences. So there are studies done about people doing things. How prayer can help healing, from remote locations. There's a lot of research on remote viewing when I was in the military. And so, the idea is that there are things that we know out there, but we don't know how we know them and why, and that's just something we have to understand, that knowledge is endless and we don't always know everything. And that's been always one of my stickers for these last 3 years, because to me, science is always questioning. There is no complete finished science.
So I just want to add to what Alex is saying is, I believe that everybody is a unique person and is born as a unique being. And with that is everyone has a unique core essence. And for us to spend our life through our experiences, and we zig and zag, and we sometimes hit a roadblock and sometimes take the wrong direction, etc. But we're always on our path to discovering who we really are as a person and what is our core essence. And there'll be signs along the way, whether people tell us, point us in the right direction, or we have another experience where we realize we're totally in the wrong, I'm gonna say wrong relationship, wrong job, etc., where our intuition is saying this just doesn't feel right. And not to make rash decisions and saying, well, it just doesn't feel right, so I'm not doing it anymore. It's to really look at what are all the signs that I'm getting that is saying I am in the right direction. And then the last part I'm just going to say is we have to have the courage. We have to have the courage to actually follow that intuition, to say, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to stop doing something I'm doing, either a relationship or a job or a certain activity, because it doesn't resonate, and I'm going to do something that feels better for myself, so that at the end of my life, I feel like I'm not going to be like Bill Nye in Living, where I feel like I didn't make choices. I just was in a rut and I continued on, and I didn't really explore life for myself.
But you have to believe in that. You have to believe that life is worth living. And and that means examining your life. And I think that's now, for those of you that you brought up intuition, which intuition is a big component in our work, and particularly now with the meaningsology work we're doing. But if anybody's interested, years ago, many years ago now, I co-authored a book with a colleague at San Diego State University entitled Intuition at Work. And I think there's another 1 or 2 books with the same title, but the subtitle of ours is Pathways to Unlimited Possibilities. You have to believe that. If you think that you only have one shot at life and one possibility, and the ancient Greeks, said that, we have one life and it's ours, to live, then you have to see the possibilities and you make choices. And freedom of choice is really important, no matter what people tell you. We have freedom of choice, even if it's nothing other than the freedom to choose our attitude. But once you start to see, every single one of us, have choices. If you look at somebody right now, I should be dead many times over. And I'm here with you guys. So I feel blessed. And so, thank you.
That's great.
Okay.
Three questions. I got to read them out of order. These will be our final 3. Is metaphysical the same as spiritualism and believing in God?
No,
it's not.
No, metaphysical was the first I guess citation of metaphysical was Aristotle, who wrote a book called Physics, and then he wrote another book called Metaphysics. Right. And some people think it was the book after physics, but a lot of people believe that it was also above physics or beyond physics. So we live in a physical world in materialism. And it really has to do with, if you look at something objectively or subjectively, can you look at something that's physical, and then can you look at something abstract? So you start to get beyond the physical, beyond things that the 5 senses, we can't see it, we can't taste it, we can't touch it, and that sort of thing. But mathematics is really metaphysical, because a lot of times there's abstract concepts that we can't actually touch. But then it moves into the realm of, what is my core essence? How do I feel? The whole intuition. How's my spirit? Is it up today? Is it down today? How's our team spirit? Are we all working together? Are we not working together? So we're getting into things that we can't touch, but we know and we feel that they're there. And then there's another level of it where people are getting, metaphysics sometimes gets into the area of angels and past lives and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different levels of using, or different ways to use this word metaphysical. Religion is usually used for a word that has to do with a certain faith that has a doctrine and that people follow. And so some people are religious, and then other people aren't. And then some people are not religious, but they feel they're spiritual. So they don't believe in a certain doctrine and a certain God that created this earth, etc. But they do feel that there's something else out there in the universe, maybe, but they can't really describe it, but they just feel it. And then they feel that there's something more to their life, but they can't really put their finger on it because it's not material. So it's beyond the physical.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I'll just add this because, yeah, this goes back to the pre-Socratic ancient Greeks. Heraclitus, the philosopher, who's also the one who kind of helped embrace the idea of the logos having a spiritual component to it. It wasn't just about meaning. And actually the logos, capital L, is considered the word, and which in a religious sense is the word of God. But the idea here is that the logos was, in Heraclitus's view, was that we're all connected, that it's the logos is the connector of all living things in the universe. And so we're all in effect one. Now, when you tell people we're all one, a lot of people can say, oh, yeah, okay, new age stuff and blah, blah, blah. Let's go to a seance and let's read my tarot cards and everything else. That's all part of this big picture that Elaine's painting. But the idea here is that the truth is out there. If you remember the X-Files. And we don't know what the truth exactly is. So we're all kind of like blind people poking at an elephant, and we're all describing it from a different vantage point. So religion, faith-based organizations, and so forth. I mean, at one point in my life, I almost became a Greek Orthodox priest. So the idea, it was after I came out of the military. And so the idea here is that, to me, that was metaphysics as well, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing that, say, some of the new age practices that we hear, or even some, if we think about the indigenous people, so much of their faith, so much of their lives are spiritual. There's no denomination that's describing them. It's the fact that they have, and there's so much we can learn from, and when we were living in the States, we lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the last place, and we were living among, 18 Pueblo tribes, and as well as the Navajo, the Apache, and so forth. And we did a lot of work with Native Americans. And it's amazing what you learn and the connection. And we find the same thing when we go to Greece. When we go to Crete, which is where my family is from, the island of Crete, the indigenous Cretans go back to the Minoans, and they're incredibly spiritual. It wasn't religious, all right? Many of them, could be pagans or whatever, but they had a spiritual core. They understood that there was something out there that was greater than themselves. And then how you tap into that, whether you use cards, seances, meditation. Now people are pushing psychedelics, right, to get people to alternate realities. There are other people who believe we have alternate universes, parallel universes. I mean, go to Gaia. There's a place you can stream some, movies and documentaries about some of these things we've been talking about. You don't have to believe in them all. I don't and everything, but I have other things that I know, and I do have faith that there's something out there that's greater than us. I cannot imagine that we're it. And I'd be sad to know that we're the best that's out there.
Yeah, there's certainly a collective consciousness for sure. And this actually touches upon it, the second last question. We live in a world where we experience crushing isolation from split shifts, surveillance, divided lunchrooms, negative news every day. So, and their general question with this context is, so what should we do? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, that kind of reminds me of a situation a colleague of mine wrote not too long ago about COVID. And he said he'd gone to an Amish community and that had no cases of COVID the entire time, last 3 years. And they asked the head of the person, he says, how come you didn't have any COVID? And he says, we don't have TV. So a lot of it is just disconnecting yourself from the news, from the noise that comes out and could contaminate your thinking and so forth. So everybody got to take a break. You got to somehow turn off your iPhone, your cell phone. These are things that help us. Sometimes the best way to connect with yourself is to disconnect.
That's right.
And to put up, and also if you're around a lot of negativity, first of all, you can put up your shield and not take it all in. So you take in little bits of it, but you just sort of but then also ask yourself, can I get out of these situations where there's so much negativity? Maybe that's a sign to you that you're always putting yourself in a situation where you don't belong. And
Mhm.
so, and sooner or later, it's going to eat at you and cause more stress, which then and causes more health issues and that sort of thing. So you have to ask yourself, can I put myself in a more positive situation somewhere else, or do I have to be in this? And so a lot of people relate that not just to work, but also family situations. Can I start to remove myself and not show up for every family event if it all becomes negative? So there are choices. As we say, we always have the freedom to choose our attitude, but we also have freedom to choose situations sometimes that we put ourselves in.
And people, surround yourself with people that give you energy, that give you a positive outlook on things rather than being around negatives. And many of you, I'm sure, are listening here, and if you're in a bad place, a lot of times you end up attracting a lot of people that are in a similar bad place, and all it does is just doesn't help you get out of that cycle. So so just basically reach out to people, as the old cell phone commercial was, reach out and touch someone, find somebody that can help you. I mean, that's part of what all the I know Belle's been in Canada's been talking about, let's talk. I mean, don't hide it. I mean, if you're feeling despondent, if you're feeling potentially depressed, clinically depressed, it's time to and we're living in a world now as opposed to years ago when I was in the military, we didn't have PTSD. We didn't have, any sort of battle fatigue. It was basically man up, shut up. And we're lucky now that we can have people actually, talk to each other and say, it doesn't make me less of a person, less of a man, less of a husband or a partner or a friend. So we're in a better place in that sense if we allow ourselves to be open to connecting with people in authentic, meaningful ways.
Absolutely. That's great. Just a quick librarian recommendation for those who are interested with the media thread. There's a great book by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. He talks about this as some ways, the abstraction of news can be a distraction. It could be entertainment. And when there's the confluence of the two, it can make you, as you're both articulating so well, distracted and not looking at meaning. And so I would highly recommend that. Of course, the library has it. So here is the perfect way of ending tonight, because you both have already touched upon this, but just as a great signing off, one person asked, would you like to talk a bit about what you both find the meaning in your life?
You go first. I'll go first.
Oh, look, she goes, you go first.
Okay, I'll go first. That's the first.
Okay.
And then Alex gets the last word, which he likes. So there you go. Okay. What I find personally meaning, well, it has changed as I've got to know myself better. I find a lot of personal meaning in writing, which is a total surprise to me because when I was in high school and university, I was a math student, 100% math student, loved math, loved that. I hated English literature class. I hated writing. I remember I had a boyfriend in high school. I used to get him to write my English assignments because I just felt like I didn't know how to express myself was really the core issue of that. And so writing to me now is very meaningful. And I feel like I have a message to share with the world before I pass on. I have messages that I want to pass on to the world. So that's very meaningful. Being with Alex in our relationship is very meaningful for me. Not only do we entertain each other, we have a lot of good laughs, but we're also want to take care of each other's highest good. So I want Alex to have the best life possible, and he in turn says that he wants me to have the best life possible. So we help each other grow. And so that's very meaningful for me. And then, of course, friends and family, and then having at least one fun thing to do a week is what I like to find meaningful. Oh, and cooking. I love cooking and eating.
I think mine is probably more abstract, other than, as Elaine said, I'll ditto everything she just said.
Cooking and eating?
Yeah, cooking and eating.
Okay.
I think for me, the most meaningful thing for me is getting up in the morning, because it's another day. And I remember meeting a Cretan, a Greek in Crete, basically talking about, getting up in the morning and seeing the sky and seeing the sea, and and being able to say hello to people and enjoy life. Because as somebody who's now at my vintage, every day matters, and every day, like who was it, the saying, there's only so many shopping days left till Christmas.
Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson said that in one of his movies. There's only so many shopping days left till Christmas. And so we have to live like that. We have to live like every day is your last. And so if you see the world that way, you're going to look at different people in a different way. You're going to say, well, I'm going to be kind again today. I'm going to, I want to, say hello. I mean, Elaine and I, we do a lot of walking, and probably the greatest thing for us is just, having conversations with people and just making people laugh, smile, helping them out, find someplace, I mean, whatever it may be. So it doesn't have to be, they're really simple things. We talk, because we're very blessed living on Prince Edward Island in Canada, because it's a very small. A lot of people don't realize it's actually a province, but it's an island, and there's only so many ways. So far, you can go north, south, east, and west, because you're going to hit the sea. But the idea is that there's an island vibe, an island culture, and to be able to walk around and just be able to feel connected as one is a really powerful thing. And I think that makes life worth living, is just to know that you're not alone in this universe, and that you can be of help to somebody else, And I know it sounds kind of like, oh yeah, that's altruistic, but it's more than that. It's like, I learned that. I mean, how could I not? I'm standing on the shoulders of Viktor Frankl, among others. I'm standing on the shoulders of all my ancient Greek philosopher ancestors. I'm accompanied by Elaine, and I'm at an age where I've seen the worst of humanity, and I've seen the best of humanity, and I'd rather focus on pointing to the light and being an inspiration for other people. When people could say, "Geez, I want what he drinks or what she eats," is an important element for us. It's like, it's not being despondent, it's not being negative. There's too much negativity in the world. And as Elaine said earlier, it takes 8 or 9 positives to overturn a negative. When you say no to somebody, when you chastise a young kid, I mean, you got to do a lot. Or, adults, we have a hard time accepting positive things. We get embarrassed, maybe. I don't. You can say all the things you want that's positive for me. But the idea is that most people, they, oh, no, really, I didn't really, it's not me, And I'm thinking, no, I mean, let's get real here. Everybody's valuable, and we have to respect everybody as an individual spirit.
Mhm.
And what I find meaningful, Lonnie, is you inviting us to share our thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Kudos to both of you for a great session tonight, and continuing Frankl's legacy, and carving out your own on that path. As you said, I think that's important to recognize that you guys have. I think it's really interesting the path that you've both taken, as far as taking his ideas and making it more theoretically approachable for like the everyday, the good life, as we've all said. So thank you. And we really have so many great comments just saying thank you for the lecture, and thank you for coming tonight.
Oh,
So
you're welcome, everybody. Thanks for
Thank you.
being with us, and we hope you all go out there and continue your search to meaning.